Hello, hello, hello. This is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative take about the world around me. So this episode, I'm focusing in on the sitcom Yes Dear. So, I think Yes Dear is a really good commentary about the aspect of the modern family. And I'm going to also break down the aspect of TV dads and tropes with families, particularly with TV dads, and how all of that is a prime example in Yes Dear. And then I'm going to spread out and give other examples about TV dads throughout. Well, some from the 50s and then expanding into the 80s, the 90s, and 90s when I grew up in those eras, TGIF and all of those aspects of TV dads and sitcoms. And on to Yes Dear. Because I think that Yes Dear is a great complement to the importance of a responsible dad and the repercussions if you don't have a father like that. All right, so let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to speak from my point of view about shows, particularly that focus on the family from the 50s on to Yes Dear, the era of Yes Dear. So in the 50s, particularly shows like Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, Ozzie and Harriet, and then the out of the not typical My Three Sons, where with My Three Sons is centering on a widow where he's taking care of his sons. And then towards the end of the series, he gets married and they tie everything together. And so essentially that was the precursor, I think, to the Brady Bunch, and to touch on that subject about multifamilies and, the aspect of blending two families from, other previous marriages or things of that nature. And so at the time of that era, touching on subjects like that, and then I'll get to the point, it was taboo, of course, to say divorce or say the spouse, the male or female, ran out or, things like that. It was particularly essence of a death, till death, and that they're widows. And so, and going along with Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver. So, the father is an essential part of the family, of the household, the way the structure is run. And of course, the mother is the forerunner to the domestic side of it, and I would equate that to the image of the family, to the persona of how the outside sees this particular family, how everything is held together. But the nucleus of the family is the father. So you get both of the perspectives of the male and female point of view. And so going along, particularly, let me address Leave It to Beaver. Now, Beaver, as you know, those who don't know, Beaver was the youngest rambunctious child that would always find himself into mishap. And so the father would give his point of view about the aspects of getting into trouble, and then his aspect of being reasonable, stern, but understanding to the child. And so it's interesting because the creators of Leave It to Beaver also created the Monsters, and I'm going to chime in on that. So the creator of Leave It to Beaver. One of the writers, I'm thinking back from my knowledge about it. So he said that, he noticed the way that his own children, particularly his son, if I'm not mistaken, his son, how, they were behaving, how they were talking, how they would commingle with each other. And so this was an outlet for him to address, to say, why don't we just create a show that centers around the child's point of view of how they see things? And then instead of talking down to the child, understanding how they see the world from their point of view. Now, so this dynamic gives a different perspective into how particularly the dad is trying to direct and give discipline to Beaver. So it's more of a rational approach. And so with Father Knows Best, you get those approaches too, but it's more, where they're both glorified, but it's even more glorified to where, I lay down the rules and let's go from there. And so with the monsters, it's particularly interesting because from what I understand, they were highlighting the aspects of being accepting of other people of the cultures, and how that's prevalent to understand and to be more of a well-rounded person. And so it's equated that this has a lot to do with the civil rights movement that was going on in the 60s, and to bring light to that's something to address. And so the dynamic between the father, the mother, and then particularly how the father is seen, it's interesting because it seems like they're trying to use comedy as a vehicle to move and focus on the serious subject matter of race relations. But at the same time, it's important to pay attention to the aspect of the structure of the father. Now, it goes into the realms of the father is important, but he's also seen as like a goofy sort of fun uncle type. And so when we move on to the 70s and we move on to the 80s and the 90s, particularly in the 70s, we get all this political structure of the dynamics of families and the male-female role and how that structures in society. So particularly with shows like Good Times, shows like The Jeffersons, shows like One Day at a Time. All these three-pronged shows address three different subject matters. Okay, so Good Times is addressing the aspect of the inner life, the inner city life, and then particularly living in the ghetto that's what it was, that you're living in the ghetto, things like that, and then upheaving and out of it and towards out of it, and finding that aspect of moving out of that harsh circumstance towards the end. Now, it also brings up the subject matter of a really prevalent point of focusing in on the internal struggle of the black man in America and the black woman in America, and how particularly the father, James, how he's always angry, it's always no sort of real solution to the problem. It's always drama after drama, one after the other. And that goes to the point of bringing up a stereotype of, these political aspects of the black man and the black family. And so how did that structure disintegrate from the 60s and the 50s when when it was prime examples of black men and then prominent men. You know, not only essence of MLK, but it was different examples of George Washington Carver. You know, was as early as the 20s, 40s, and so, and then men like this, and it's countless others, and then the figure of the black man, with the Harlem Renaissance, and that's up for debate too, where that was just like a bourgeoisie, so to speak. That's what the Marxist sort of point of view about that, when they come in and say that they were liberating the blacks and sort of that atmosphere of that it wasn't really a pure tone renaissance for the black culture, when there's a lot of undertones too to notice about the aspects of the Renaissance. It was about class and sophistication too, and of course bringing the reality of the situation about the socialist part of it too, and that, from what I understand about the history aspect of that. But my point being is that throughout the 20s, 40s, and so on, and then going as early as back as prolific figures like Benjamin Banneker or Booker T. Oh my gosh, I don't know why that's failing me. Booker T. Washington, and then all these, and then as far as Harriet Tubman, and I'm going back in my mind about that. Strong, and then see Madam C.J. Walker, prominent example too about it. And then I'm thinking about making a podcast about these roles and figures, how they contradict the walking theme of today, that black Americans were oppressed throughout history, which is, how could that be the case when somebody like Madam C.J. Walker, she, with hard work and determination, she came from nothing and she made it on her own. She was the quintessential strong woman, and then the aspect of a single mom making it, and she made predominant success. So all of these figures, and then Benjamin Banneker being a part of the aspect of the Revolutionary War, and then being a inventor in all these aspects. Now, if that's true about the downtrodden of the African American experience in America, how is it that these prolific figures existed? So, and that goes without saying to the essence of the images that is seen in good times. So it moves on to that again, with that pushing that political militant aspects of the black man is so repressed. And so we go to the Jeffersons, where they go have a completely different undertone about the aspect of wealth and affluence, and how through hard work you can get to the next step to prominence. And then we go to the aspect of one day at a time, when it's a single mom dealing with the aspect of making a life of her own by, essentially, for one, I understand, leaving her husband because she doesn't feel like she is heard or doesn't have her own sense of self. Okay, so with one day at a time, so she is a single mom, but it's very important to focus in on the aspect that she's a single mom by choice. So for my understanding, that in her marriage she didn't feel like she was heard, and so it goes along with the aspect of the women's liberation movement of the 70s, and the first wave of that. And so striking it on her own with her teenage daughters at hand, and then the situations about that. When in actuality, this could be an important part to understanding these mental capacities of how particularly the male role has, in some sense, devolved into the important, prominent aspects of culture that it's more apt to work out the differences in your relationship and then try to see that stability and have that stability for the children, particularly with these girls, instead of just ending everything and pursuing things on your own for just selfishly without. Because then again, that's the aspect of truly being a part of a family. If you consider yourself a part of your family, you always consider the aspects of others. And when you're doing things about the aspects of others, you take their own needs into consideration. And so, going on to the 80s and the 90s and then to yesteryear, you get good examples of the importance of the male role, particularly one good example of that wraps everything up, particularly before Family Matters, Full House, and Family Matters. So these two shows, not episodes, but these two shows that had very different situations in comedy, but they united in a strong front. And to the really prominent example of how strong male roles really change and shape the dynamic and culture of a family, and how that outward expression is seen throughout society, whether the children, what they bring, and as they develop and grow and go out in the world when they are, adults, and versus how they act too. And then also on that same point of how they act too when they're in school, primary school and through high school and all that, how that is quite different versus a single parent household. Now, with Full House, now it was 3 male figures. They all had they were all seen differently in the eyes of these 3 girls. But at the forefront, it was understood that the importance of a male role is very essential to the development and the well-being of these girls' mental health, mental well-being. And so a show going on to Family Matters. So we have the strong male figure of Carl, and it's even more prevalent of his role, his strength with him being a cop, particularly in Chicago, and the aspect of introducing the realities of that situation of being a person who puts their life on the line by being a cop, particularly in Chicago, when Chicago is, from statistics alone, and seen as one of even more prevalent now in our society as one of the crime-ridden, violent cities in the country, or in the USA is. And so that he see himself of duty of being a cop and being gentle and understanding and caring to his family, that says a whole lot about the dynamic structure of these children and how that as they grow and they get older and how they bring that value out into the world. And so all of this said, this sets up to my thoughts about yesterday, and then I'm going to give the background of the facts about the background of when it started and how long it lasted and the creators of it. But it shapes the point of how Greg, his role in his family, how he's is the sense of reason for everybody, and he's also emotional, not only an economic support, he's an emotional support, when needed. But the aspect of how they, on the other aspect of that, of how they demean how important his character that is, he gets it from his wife, and even his in-laws, something to say about that. And so, it's other dynamics that are good examples. But it's important to focus in on the negative examples that are amplified in the show, because it goes without saying to the reasons of why things have shifted into the respect of man and the culture of man, and how that's changed the aspect of this culture and the society we live in today. It's not as it's not as structured as it once was and as it could be. And so I think they do a very funny way of highlighting that serious matter. All right, here we go. I'm going to get into all of that. Unfortunately, Alan Kershenbaum is no longer with us, but he left quite a comedy writing producer mark in television history. So, for instance, shows like Coach, the Gregory Hines Show, The Center of the Universe, and he was also in production with My Name is Earl and Raising Hope. So these comedy duos, they give the insight and the aspect of how the show is, like yesteryear, is ran, and how they touch on the commentary of the modern man and the modern family. And so you see these, it varies the line where they use comedy to touch on serious issues, specific issues, to where it's comfortable to address. So, for instance, hold on, baby girl, hold on, okay? So, for instance, when the brother-in-law, Jimmy, and Christine is Kim's sister, when they come in and they ask to live because of they don't have anywhere to stay, and the brother-in-law is out of work, so Greg is generous enough to open his home to him. But throughout the beginning seasons, it's more and more apparent to where Greg asks the question, make the point of, I know you're waiting until you find the right options for yourself that you want to take for a career path, but you got to put your pride aside and find work. And so those cleverer touches with comedy is a nice relief in order to get the conversation going about the aspect of the role that the good father is presented and plays in the family, and how those outward values are turned to the children and how they observe these things. And that's even more prevalent to one particular episode that addresses the aspects of nurturing and paying attention to your child's emotional well balance. So in the beginning season, their oldest son, and I'm going to the in-laws, their oldest son, they don't have enough money to throw him his birthday party for his 5th birthday. And so they said, well, he's pretty much used to it. And then Kim and Greg take it amongst themselves to help and give the child, a birthday party, because that's what children should have. You should celebrate their birth, and they should have fun because they're only kids, so that, they deserve to have that specialties in their life so they can appreciate that when they get older. But at the same time, their oldest son is showcasing antisocial behavior. And then, Kim, hush, baby. Kim, I know, but I'm right here, baby. And Kim points that out. And so it's interesting with the antisocial behavior that their oldest son has. It rubs off on the other children, and they start to mimic that behavior. So that's a funny way of showcasing too the aspect of how the influence of what adults do and the influence of that behavior is emulated through a child, and then good or bad, and that spreads out to other people, and then for this case, other children. All right, so on the second half, I'm going to break down different episodes and give more commentary. Here we go. Okay, so Yes Dear ran from 2000 to 2006. So it was right in the cups of the new millennium, right in there. And so they made commentary and tropes, too, about the aspect of technology in the new age. For instance, the brother-in-law, Jimmy, showcasing his affluence by using Photoshop and stuff like that in order to see the people who said he wouldn't amount to much, using technology to perpetuate an image that isn't true. And that's quite on the nose there with the aspect of social media as we see things today. That's something interesting to take a look at too, because comedy is really good about that, putting the finger on the edge of the future and seeing where things are going to go. And also the goofy trope of, which doesn't make sense, it can be really frustrating too when you break it down, with Greg and him making that running joke where he doesn't know much about technology. But when he's an accountant, and you got to be kind of computer savvy in order to maneuver different calculations, and especially when you're using office software like Excel and things like that, and PowerPoint, and you got to know something. And so the creators of Yes Dear were Alan Kirschenbaum and Gregory Thomas Garcia. Okay, I'm going to pull this up. So Gregory Garcia is known for shows like My Name is Earl, Sprung, The Guest Book, The Millers, Raising Hope, just to name a few. And of course, all of these sources will be provided for you, and the links will be provided for you in this episode. Okay, so I'm going to break down different shows and give my point of view about it. So this particular episode, The Annoying Repetitive Child, and Armed Prince. So Greg puts on the Blue's Clues DVD to distract Sammy, their toddler, named Sammy, so he can use the bathroom. As such, Sammy becomes addicted to the show and refuses to stop watching it. Greg does not have the backbone to make him stop, and they end up replaying DVDs for hours. Now, in this episode, so it's one of those things where, in retrospect, you doing everything that you can for your kid, and, to have empathy for that. People who have children understand that when you try to implicate, no, we don't want you to watch TV and things like this, and you got to go to the restroom or you got to do things, and you're crying and crying and crying, and you're trying to find a happy medium. And so that's a bit harsh to say he doesn't have any backbone. It's a lot of realistic situations, points of view, other points of view that you gotta take, for instance, about that. But at the same time, Greg is working a demanding job, an executive job, and doing all this, and then trying to take care of the domestic aspects of the household while his wife is out pursuing her goals and her aspiration to be a business person, which is creating these things called the arm prints, where, the whole thing of apron for arms, which he tries his best to, and this also points to the aspect of demasculating the important role that he plays, and specifically with being honest and the benefits of constructive criticism. So he tries to attempt to give reason to his wife to understand that, I don't think this is such a good idea. But Kim, being the way that she is, she thinks it's an attack on her value, so he can't really say that much. And so this thing goes on and on to where, if it also brings the point of, has she really dealt with anything on a realistic aspect of dealing with things, situation, day-to-day life? Or, has she been sheltered most of her life? Because, she could have had the point of view of taking the initiative to take Sammy with her and just be there at the booth while she's, selling these things and seeing how these things go, instead of putting all this on her husband, because, her husband already has a lot on his plate. And then, that's what a good marriage is about, and that's what a good relationship is about, that finding that give and take, and that, helping each other, and then, relieving the stress off of each other. And that's what it should be about. But it was all this whole thing. And then when her father came in to help and support, it goes along the aspect too of where does this sheltered and sort of false sense of reality come and you see that that's the link of that is clear, and how Kim's father is acting towards her in this episode, because he supports her even though he confesses that he doesn't think it's a good idea. And so again, comic relief brings the forefront of addressing these certain issues that the aspect of how unfortunately, typically, how it's presented, the mother, the female, is seen as in the modern society for raising a family. She's either have a type A personality, she's overwhelmed, overstressed, and she can't take a step back and look at things for what they are. And she wants to, take over things, but not think about things rationally. And then, when the man tries to do the normal thing and step up and take over, he gets knocked down. And these instances keep coming up and up and up in this show. And so it's quite interesting too with the episode that I'm going to address in just a second. Okay, so with breaking the fourth wall, in this episode, so I'm going to read what it said and give my thoughts. So it says, the end of the episode, Greg's new assistant has Jimmy saying, his tagline, how hot is that? Jimmy says that a lot. So they're breaking it. It's all of this aspect of different features of breaking the fourth wall. So also in the episode where Greg rearranges the living room furniture, he had the couch facing away from the camera, even though everyone agreed that it was better that way. It just didn't feel right somehow. So at the end of the episode, 2 people who won a contest for a walk-on role for the role are just standing in Greg's house. Jimmy explains they won the contest, and Greg tells them to step off camera so they'll be seen on the wide screen. And so with all of this, let me point out the aspect of Greg rearranging the furniture. So this is another power control move between the two of them that, as I mentioned before, about the dynamic between Greg and his wife. So, he's trying to give his thought. And so forgive me, y'all, I'm feeling a bit under the weather, so bear with me. So he's giving his points of view of how he wants the house to be arranged and how he wants a house to look. But again, Kim shoots him down and doesn't understand that, it's both of the wife and the husband's input is very important to the flow and the atmosphere and how the house looks. It's not all about her. And, she has that point of view of everything that I think is right and everything that you say is wrong. And so this goes into another episode. Instead of me reading it out, I'm just going to recall and talk about it. So there's a particular episode where, it starts out in the beginning, I guess credits or so, in the beginning scene. And it's rainy, and then it thunders and the lights go off. So Kim goes to put her arm around Jimmy, the brother-in-law, instead of her husband, Greg. And, it's brought to the forefront, why doesn't she see her husband as the protector or the person that she would be comfortable with in a sense of danger? And then, she's making the excuse he was just closer, it's just this and it's just that. And then also that I make another joke about his son, how he just ran towards Jimmy instead of his, running towards his dad. And, they're making a joke about Craig being so thin that, he probably chip a tooth or something. And so we go on, and then it goes into the episode to where it does, again, use comic relief to bring forth an issue, about the aspect of the problems that happens when you demasculate the importance of a male figure. And then you devalue and you don't appreciate the value of a man like Greg that is stable and that is supportive and understanding and reasonable. And so they bring forth the aspects of his son, seeing him as, his sloppy older brother because of how Kim, again, treats him. He is... And then it also goes along the lines of the issue, too, of, when you see... When you see things like this in your relationship for either, female or male, both sides, it's good to address those things before you get into a relationship, even more so a marriage, because it breaks down the fabric of particularly even more so when you have children, it breaks down the family unit. And children don't have a sense of, they don't have structure because they only see structure as, criticizing or taking someone down. They don't see the structure of discipline, of the importance of being submissive and the importance of being able to, that's an interesting thing. So with submissive attitudes, it's unfortunate that that's seen as something that is, you're being a doormat, or you're just not, you have low self-esteem or something. That's not the case. Submissive personalities are vital to the aspect that you're not, essentially you're not a selfish person. You see the beauty and the value of being humble. And so having that and that quality and, showcasing that quality that was showcased more and more and more in Kim and, also in Christine and all that. And Christine is a whole nother subject, so I'll get into that briefly. So that would help with the dynamic and the stressors of raising children. Now, raising children is a gift, but it can be very demanding. But I'm just pointing out that's unnecessary stress when somebody has to be, controlling or not being somebody that's very selfish in their thought processes. And so this goes too with the aspect of these dynamics is seen into the development of Sammy, of their oldest son, and they have a daughter towards the end of this series. And so, as far as the early development of Sammy going to preschool, and then with Sammy, with his mother doing everything for him and being, saying, even controlling her son and saying he's not doing certain things right, let me be with him, let me do this, let me hover over him. He's lacking the social skills that he needs to function in order to be productive in preschool. And that's very alarming. And so, out of this, again, humor, which is the forefront of everything, it helps to shine a light on these issues in a way that's comfortable for people to be aware of it, but at the same time find humor and comic relief in order to get on to the next scene, or to find it comfortable again to want to listen or hear subject matter like that. So that's what phases, I think, the aspects of how shows. Now, not all shows are this way now. Particularly shows that have to do with the family unit, and things like this. It's all pushing this serious political agenda and that takes away from the appeal, because comic relief is greatly needed in society in order to take down and be humble, but take down, for example, tyranny, or to disevolve destructive ideologies in our society to where we can find a common ground to be a stable society. And so it's important to have shows like Yes Dear, and it was, good for its time to have shows like Yes Dear to make light, but also flip everything on the head and showcase the serious issues of the breakdown and the destruction of the modern family. And so with Greg too, you see that he is, on the surface it looks like he's not all that, he's tightly wound and all of these things. But on the other hand, he tries his best to be as rational as possible, but he's also a human being. And, the aspect of the in-laws being there, living there, and then trying to, combat with that. And, it also brings up the subject matter, too, of multi-generational families living together under one roof. And how does that work, per se, in a modern society? Because, And centuries, thousands of years before now, and so on, and even in the Industrial Revolution into the 40s, and then it stopped at the 50s, and then this still goes on to now, even more more so in other countries and stuff like that. But let me refocus everything in on the American fabric of society, to where multi-generations lived together under one roof, and it was a suitable means to do so in order to survive the hardship and get through the day-to-day of living and living in the cusp of the agricultural society onto the Industrial Revolution, to where things aren't so hard in the aspect of having to outsource other people to take care of your responsibilities. And so, that brings up the subject too about that of the benefits, and that's not for everybody to live in a multi-generational household, and all these things about the aspect of daycare and the daycare system, of people who live in a multi-generational family. They have the affordability, the wife has the affordability to stay at home and take care of what she needs, but there's also the grandparents there to chip in and take care of stuff too. And so it's quite interesting when we go back to Yes Dear. Kim is afforded to stay at home, but at the same time, she sends her kid to daycare and things like that. And so, what is that aspect of having the privilege to stay at home, but still you take your child to daycare? It says it's very telling to the personality. And then for the most part, because that comes up about that too. And then, so, I get the aspect of being social and, with introducing social cues to children early on. But it's one thing to, put them in daycare when you are afforded the ability to be with your child and to stay at home. And so that brings up the forefront too with Christine. So, she eventually eventually Jimmy does get a job, but it's still she stays at home until she is encouraged. Again, she's encouraged by Greg though. And then, her husband falls in line. His development also changes too throughout the episode, the seasons, Jimmy. But, she has this very disagreeable, very dominant personality, to where she has a male trait in her personality. But at the same time, she wants the aspects and the duties of staying at home with their children. So it's like, it's also, again, comedy, bringing light to the contradictions of that. Why is that suitable or acceptable in a modern society? And then also, I think they were touching ground too about how at the time, and then, even more so now, how you see the strong, independent woman types where they're, I don't need no man kind of stuff and man this, man that. But yet, in the same time, you're looking and your whole personality is centered around trying to find love and all of these things. And so, I think that sheds light to that too. And let me get back to Jimmy, and I'll wrap all this up. So Jimmy, he finds his way, and then particularly when he takes the role of security guard, he starts to find more purpose and meaning into the fact of it. He puts his life at risk, life on the line, possibly at risk, and that, also changes the dynamic between him and his wife. And then he starts to become more noble. And then she starts her character development too when she goes back to school, and she starts to be more responsible and be more, more soft and more reasonable, to a lesser extent. But she still has her, overbearing, I guess, personality. Yeah, her pungent personality there. And out of this, they eventually they work and they combine their means together, and eventually that is one of those things that I think they were putting that out there where you put out into the world what you want, and it comes back to you. What you put out into the world comes back. And they, the neighbor that was next door, left, and they were able to afford and buy a home next to him. And it's quite interesting. So before it was really known if they would get the house or not, it was a couple that was vetting for the house before them, and it so happened to be Alan Thicke and Shelley Long. And so they have this personality where they're pretentious people, and so they go into the aspects of talking about Jimmy and Christine. And so Greg steps in and says, well, how, you don't have the right to talk about them like that. They're family. And they bring out a very prevalent point too, where, how can you criticize us when you seem like you hate them? And he's like, well, I have the right to hate them because they're my family. You don't even know them, so how can... And so this dynamic also, it's alarming, but it also brings the aspect to another character development of Greg, to where you start to see more and more that it doesn't seem as if like he's somebody that is, which is obvious, but it's more prevalent as this series goes on, because if he was a person that didn't care about the feelings of others in his family, particularly his wife or so, they wouldn't be there. But, it's more pronounced there in this scene. And so, yes, of course, you see this on the flip side. Yes, it's not the best look for the way he maneuvered everything as far as his attitude towards, the circumstance of them living there. But, you got to see things from his point of view, too, because, that it was his house, and, that's a lot to take on. And it's just like mutual responsibility there, and also a mutual understanding from that, that you got to see it from those point of views, too, that, you have to have empathy for him, too, for Craig. And so you see even more character development when Jimmy and Christine get their home, and then turns out that Greg loses his job because of this, internal struggle for power, and because he works at a entertainment studio or a Hollywood studio in LA. And so, it also makes commentary about the aspect of the seediness too, touches a little bit on that, about the seediness of working in the entertainment industry. And so because of that internal struggle for power between Stravinsky, his boss, and then the new boss coming in, he loses his job, and then he eventually gets it back. But out of that, he starts to learn, have a different sense of reality of, take a step back and smell the roses sort of aspect. And that's unfortunate that Jimmy tells him that, but at the same time, he can't stand him living there when Jimmy and his whole family lived in his house for 4 years. So it's like, where does that dynamic go? And so it's also quite interesting, too, as the show ends, that something happens to where they have Greg and Kim, they all have to move back. They have to get out of their house and move in with Christine and Jimmy. So it's like, that cosmic joke or so, where, eventually it'll come back to you. And so, again, I cannot touch how important it is that comedy will get you to the point to be able to see these things and take light of these things, and to a point where it's comfortable to find the means of thinking about this subject without feeling like you're having a political agenda thrust upon you, or you feel guilty about something. And so when comedy is done in the right way, it's fuel for the soul. And so it's unfortunate that is failed and lacking now, because in the media per se, even more so per se, the media is the forefront into what we are saying as a society about ourselves. And that's even more prevalent in the structure and the dynamic of a family. And so when you don't have these elements in play with comedy, and you don't welcome these things start to fall out of line, and these strange ideologies start to perpetuate into society to where it breaks us all down. And my point being, and I'm going to end on this, that's why, and truly to say about that, people look back towards classic comedy and the golden era, because for the campiness of what it was, and it still brought to the forefront a very prominent example of the importance of the discipline structure and what the value that has on to society, the discipline structure of a father, and how his rationality and the balance with that, with the feminine, the and the domestic and the submissive and the understanding and humble, and then also humble from both ends, the man and the woman, how these structures are important to the fabric of society. And, as years go on, you see the degradation and breakdown of all that. And then I think that Yes Dear was the last of the generation to make the juxtaposition really interesting, to where, it talks about the importance of a traditional family, but it also brings up the forefront of the different ideologies and the different structures of the aspect of what a man is supposed to be and of what a woman is supposed to be, as far as their role in the family. And how using humor to tap onto that, to where you can see how that interplays in the destruction of the family, even though they're trying their best to be a happy-go-lucky family from the outside. And so I think that Yes Dear is it's just clever how they merged all those ideas together within themselves. So I'd like to know what all of you think. So what are your opinions about sitcoms throughout the decades, particularly that focus on families, and then the aspect of a sitcom like Yes Dear? Either email me, follow me on Substack, follow me on X, and of course make comments on YouTube. It'd be greatly appreciated. And also, you enjoy my content, feel free to support me. And as I mentioned, speaker, I have a supporters link where you can support, and it's $5 a month, I believe. And I will give you in return exclusive content. I appreciate all you listeners out there. Thank you so much. All right, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care out there. Bye-bye now.